Big A Pride. Well, hello. Welcome to the first episode of the month of Pride on Brian Breaks Character. Now, caveat, our Pride sequence of episodes is actually going to start next week because we need to put this writer's strike front and center just a little bit longer, but I have the perfect guest to have this conversation with me today, and Michael Sucsy just happens to be gay, so I think it all kind of works out kismetically. So if you don't know Michael Sucsy, he is a Golden Globe, Emmy, and PGA award-winning film director, and a screenwriter, and he's a producer, and he is best known for creating Grey Gardens on HBO. So you may not know this about me, but I am a Grey Gardens mega fan. I have seen the documentary hundreds of times. I know it from beginning to end. My best friends and I quote it back and forth to each other. My mom and I send memes to each other. And Michael's production is the one that starred Jessica Lange and Drew Barrymore. And this is the film. And I don't know if you've seen this or not, but if you have not, their performances are incredible. Jessica Lange won the Emmy for it, and Drew Barrymore got the Best Actress Golden Globe and SAG Awards. So run on over to HBO after you're listening to this episode and watch this movie. It is incredible. Now, I fell in love with the documentary, and so this movie just took it to a whole nother level for me. So a little bit more about Succy's Grey Gardens. It actually won 2 Golden Globes and 6 Emmys total, and it actually took the record for 17 Emmy nominations. So I just think that's like, I thought I'd bring us some good royalty, some TV royalty to have this conversation about the WGA strike. And Michael is also a member of the DGA. So he is perfectly positioned for us to really have a conversation that grasps kind of both of those perspectives as we're seeing producers and writers wrestle with the future of what it looks like to make television, right? A little bit more about Michael, because I think you deserve to know who you're hearing from today. He also directed Sony's box office hit The Vow, starring Channing Tatum and Rachel McAdams, nobodies, total unknown actors you've never heard of. He also directed MGM's Every Day and multiple episodes of 13 Reasons Why on Netflix. He is the president and the CEO of Hungry Duck Productions and resides in Los Angeles with his husband, Dimitri Sougakis, one of the Hollywood Reporter's top 20 interior designers in Los Angeles. So before any more wonderful news about Michael's background, I want to set you up for this conversation. So in this conversation, we're talking about where the writer's strike intersects with the Directors Guild of America, how it affects writers now, how we imagine it's going to affect writing in the future when we're talking about AI, when we're talking about television production. We get into all the nooks and crannies of that. And, Michael's a writer at heart, a creative. And so in this conversation, we dig personally into, how is this affecting him as a creator? Where is this like holding him back? And even get into the conversation of like, how is your family showing up for you in this weird writer's strike time? So let's get to the episode. Well, Michael, welcome to the show. I'm so glad that you're here.
So happy to be here, Brian. Thanks.
Warning to everyone, the peacocks are really having a good time today. So we might hear some squawking today, which I just think means the peacocks are on the writer's side with this strike going on right now. They are picketing all over the yard right now. So one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, Michael, and I'm so grateful that you're here, is because you're a member of the WGA and the DGA. And so I think that you have a unique perspective being members of those two groups. And, I think most of us have a good sense of what's going on with the strike, but can you share from your perspective, what's going on? Why is this happening?
Well,
big question. I thought I'd start off with a really big question.
Yeah, it's a massive question with it's complicated, but I think it can actually be boiled down to something that's pretty simple. I mean, I think that the elephant in the room is extreme income inequality, and that is happening across the country. It's happening, of course, across the world, but it's really, really hitting home in the U.S. and it's really hitting home in Hollywood. And as everyone knows, the entertainment industry is undergoing, rapid changes, has been for the last, several years. It almost feels like we're playing a game where the rules are constantly changing and nobody tells you what the rules are or that they've changed. And it always feels like we're playing, catch up in that regard. or the ground shifting beneath our feet. And it's natural for things to evolve and change, but the speed at which they're changing, and as I mentioned, the income disparities that it's perpetuating or causing, it has reached a crisis point. So that's sort of the big picture. There's a lot of
Yeah.
specifics to it that I'm sure we'll get into.
And so when we're thinking about this, I love the way you put that into that perspective. It sounds like the writers are like, hey, we need to stop. This is like a running train that no one is ever saying, like, let's catch up and see what's going on so we can adjust what's happening, because this contract is no longer working for how fast things are changing right now. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Well, that's exactly why we have contracts for a certain period of time, in this case, 3 years, and then they get renegotiated. But the last time, excuse me, allergies are kicking in today. The last time that we were negotiating, the idea of everything was on television, and the idea that things were going to be on the internet was sort of ridiculous. Or not, I'm sorry, it wasn't ridiculous. It was actually the WGA saw into the future what was happening. And I think it's like the day that the contract got finally renegotiated was the day that Hulu launched. So it was all happening right around that time. But the distinction is that the streamers aren't like even the old HBO, and I say old HBO because it just changed over to a new format yesterday called Max, was still considered a form of cable, not basic cable, but it was cable, so it was still television, even though their slogan was that they weren't television. But the pure streamers were under an internet contract, under a different set of negotiated terms. And now, essentially, maybe not everything, but 90% for give or take, is all on the internet streaming side, but it's still television. That's how people are consuming, television and film entertainment for the most part. And the contract that we're being paid under is not reflecting that. And so, that's one of the things that, some people have said, oh, the spoiled writers, they're, demanding this, they're demanding that. We're not even looking for more. We're looking for what we already used to have. And that's part of the technique of on the studio side, is to roll things back and claw back in these negotiations and give a little but take even more. And it's very frustrating.
Yeah, when we're saying this, and kind of to get into some of the specifics, you started to touch on it just now, can you give us, is there a way to articulate like 3 important asks that the WGA is wanting right now? I know it's hard to narrow down to 3.
Yeah, and there's also the WGA isn't just one group of writers. There are nighttime comedy writers, there are feature film writers, there are television writers, and obviously a lot of our needs and concerns overlap. Right. But there's also distinct differences between them. So it's a little bit hard to be all encompassing. But generally speaking, there are. Certainly the rate at which we're compensated, what our minimum is that you can pay us. We're asking for an increase in that. Everybody in this country is aware of what's going on with inflation, and normal inflation is what, 3%, and we're more than double that right now. So even if we go up 3%, we're still losing money in terms of our spending power. It's very frustrating. Unsatisfactory pay, I guess, would be sort of a one major thing. For the television writers, there's a huge concern with staffing. They've created this system of mini rooms. It's kind of complicated to explain, but I'll try to be succinct about it. In the old broadcast network days, of like Grey's Anatomy or something like that, or ER, there were like 22 episodes a year, right? And so that meant you had a whole staff of writers. I didn't write on those shows, so I don't know the exact number, but well above a dozen that would work with the showrunner to break down the season, write all the episodes, and you don't write all of them, all 22, and then start working. You get a couple under your belt and you start shooting them in sequence and moving forward. So. And then, there's 52 weeks in the year. There might be some weeks of, development in the beginning. There's, of course, weeks in post. And so by the time you're done with it, it's basically a year of work with a little bit of a break. And then you go back and start over again. And then also, and in the meantime of that, the shows would rerun. those 22, cover 44 weeks, and you still have 10 weeks of Christmas specials or whatever you want to talk
Right.
about. And what would happen is that the writers would, in addition to getting paid for those weekly times when they were working, they would get residuals on the reruns of those, and then further residuals if they aired in foreign markets and things like that. With the streamers, if you probably noticed, if on a quote unquote television show on the streaming services, there's probably 6 or 8, maybe 10 episodes. So it's sometimes a third or a fourth of the number of weeks. In addition to that, they used to, for a new show, shoot a pilot, decide whether they're going to go forward with it, and if they were going to go forward with that into series, like I said, they'd hire the writers' room. Now what they're doing is they're buying a pitch of an idea. They're creating something called a mini room, where they bring in a couple of writers at minimum pay, at the lowest they can pay them, and 2 writers, not 10 writers, 2 writers, or 10 or 15. 2 writers will work with that showrunner to break 3 or 4 episodes, and then they'll go and shoot that. Or sorry, maybe even they'll break the 6 episodes. I'm not a showrunner, so
Sure,
somebody else could be more specific in how this works. But the point is that it's way less work, way less people, way less money. And because it's on a streaming service, they own it in perpetuity and are not sending it out to other, and globally.
Right.
So they're not sending it out to other services and selling it off to, they are getting more viewers for it, but they're not compensating the creators, so the writers, the directors, the producers, in the way that they were. So that's residuals.
Right.
And so with the reason that people have been comparing it to like a gig economy and being, Uber drivers or, that kind of a thing is that you can't piece together, you can't pay your bills only off working off, 6 weeks a year.
Right.
I mean, you just can't, especially not at minimums. So you're back in the pool. You're not with that show gets picked up. Those 2 writers in the beginning aren't even guaranteed to get back on the show to continue writing.
Right.
It's just very, you feel discarded as a creative. You don't feel respected. You don't feel valued.
Yeah.
So those are some concerns. And on the feature side, it has to do the equivalent on the feature side is that the way that feature scripts contracts are broken down. They're called steps. So you do sometimes a treatment, like an outline, you get paid for that. And then you do a first draft and get paid for that. And then you get to do a rewrite and get paid for that. And you do a polish and get paid for that. And each one's a step. And what has been happening for a lot of people is it's called a 1-step deal. And they're like, you get 1 shot to do it. And so then there's a lot of pressure on the writer to do free rewrites because they want to do a good job, so that they get more work in the future and the movie gets made. Because if the movie doesn't first of all, you usually have a bonus if the movie does get made. So you're incentivized to get that movie made, even if it's beyond your control, but you're doing tons of free work. And that's what it boils down to. It's we're being asked to do work for free and not like for a week, but like months and months and months.
Right. And that's also, it feels like it's trading off of the passion that any creative person has for the work that they're doing. It's like, we're not paying you because you have a passion and you're getting paid because you're living out your passion. I mean, that might be that conscious of a thought from the studio, but like, that's what they're trading against. It's like, you love writing, so you're going to keep putting in your best effort every single day, even if it's for so less money and less time. And
I would definitely say that that's our Achilles heel is that we love what we do. We are passionate about it. We want to do great work. The work is tied to us, in terms of, our name and our reputation. We don't want to put out trash. You don't want to just phone it in.
Right.
And so you want to do a great job.
And so when we're talking,
and the other, go ahead.
No,
let's just say the other thing, and we can get into it is AI. Their AI is AI is rapidly improving. I mean, rapidly. And there is this threat of, if you look at like what I said before about the number of weeks that it used to be a year of work, and now it's like 6 weeks of work or something like that. They're just trying to get everything down to the bare bones to make the most amount of profit. And what they're doing is they're actually cannibalizing the industry, and they won't even and we can get into that in a minute. But with AI specifically, it's not just, oh, I'm going to be eliminated. My job's going to be eliminated. Therefore, I've got to fight this. Is that you're going to drive people away from the business? Who's going to want to join this industry?
Right.
And this is what I mean by cannibalizing it. Like, yeah, maybe they'll make more money in the super short run, but eventually people are going to drop out. I know a bunch of people are already talking about dropping out, and new people are not going to be attracted, not going to be drawn to the industry if they see what, that you can't make a living doing it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what I just heard you say is like, this is like a denigration of the art form is what we're seeing is like people leaving, less people doing good work. Like that at some point, let's pretend the WGA burned and died. And then we're like, the good writers aren't going to be around. It's going to be whoever scrabbled around and maybe we could scrabble together to do it. Like, it just feels like it's going to be a losing promise. And that's what people are saying is the only reason that, they can't say yes is money.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. It's money.
I mean, it's not, as you know, it's not, as you mentioned in the beginning, it's not just the WGA. So it's the WGA right now is on strike, but the contracts for both SAG and
Right.
the DGA, which are two separate contracts, two separate unions, are both up on the same day, which is June 30th. And the actors right now are voting to authorize,
That's right.
or not, but most likely yes, strike authorization. And who knows what will happen with the directors. And then next year, IATSE comes up and the Teamsters. So it's not just I mean, yes, there are specific issues that are just for the writers, but the principle behind it, it's happening across the board to everybody. And they want to eliminate, they want to, yeah, I mean,
we saw this with the IATSE strike
sad.
Last year when we really went through this conversation about like what is your condition of life like? What is your like how does it all add up to having a life that is worth living when it's looking like this? So right.
Well, and the other thing that they've been doing on the feature side too is just that it's this whole. I keep pushing my hands together like I've got a marshmallow between them because it's like being inside that trash compactor. In Star Wars, you're asked to do more with less. Now, budgets are way up on these television shows, but the writers' compensation is down by 25%. So they can't, as somebody described, it's like, well, they can't negotiate on the price of lumber. Lumber's lumber, and gas is gas. And so they can't, they can't negotiate on that. So they're negotiating on what they think they can, I guess.
Yeah.
And so even though they're spending more money, they're squeezing the people that do it. So for me as a director, or so I was mentioning before, the writers are expected to do things, maybe not as many episodes, but even still, I mean, sorry, they had 22, they had the year to do like 22 episodes and now they're only doing 6. So, but even relative and compensating for the difference in the number of episodes, it's still squeeze. They don't have enough time for us to do our best work. And it's the same thing as a director. What used to be, when I was a production assistant, I used to work on movies that were 110 days. And I'm sure there's some massive movies that are still shot like that, but then it went to like 70 days and 50 days and 30 days. And now it's like 25 days. And you're still doing a 2-hour movie.
Right. Yeah. Where's all that money going that is spent on the movie? Is it like CGI and the actors or what's, I mean, you're saying that's making the bigger investment. I may sound like a little bit like a novice when I ask that question, but like, where's that big budget going?
It's not one place. So, right. I mean, it depends on, I mean, if you're looking at the budget of all the Netflix projects, or are you looking at everything Netflix spends? You know what I mean? Those are two different numbers. I mean, obviously inflation is part of it. Obviously television shows used to be shot, mostly on a studio backlot in Burbank, and now they're flying to Italy and New York and LA, all in one episode type of a thing. But so, they're spending more money. People are, I mean, they're creating value for their customers who want to tune into that kind of material. But they're also doing a great job of compensating themselves. I mean, I wrote down it says here in 2022, the two co-CEOs of Netflix combined made $101 million. And the next 4 executives took home another $66 million. So that's $167 million. And the total annual cost to Netflix to give the writers everything that we're asking for is $68 million. So $167 million to compensate 6 people. And we're asking for $68 million so that we can live and have a, essentially a middle-class lifestyle.
Yeah. That's wild. So when we're thinking about this, if you had like a megaphone and you could say, this is what I want them to hear, the producers and all of this, is there one message that you'd want them to hear? Is it around this like lifestyle, this money lifestyle situation?
Yeah, I
think else?
I mean, I'll talk more from my own perspective and just sort of like the perspective of everyone in the guild, because that's not my job or my role. But the amount of free work that we do, or it's not even the kind of free work that I was talking about before about, like a rewrite that's like not really considered a rewrite. It's more the work that we do on spec. Meaning that like we work out the whole outline and the whole plot before we go in to pitch it. And then we pitch it for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And, and then takes a really long, everything takes a very, very long time. So you're sometimes working on a project literally for 3 or 4 years before you're paid anything, if you're paid anything, because maybe it doesn't sell. And you're not really compensated when you do make something, you're not so well compensated that it
makes it all worth it,
or that it makes it worth it for the time, for that other time. And so I don't think people realize that. People only, I think that outside the industry only sees the projects that get made, not the films and television shows that don't get made. And that doesn't mean they don't get made because they weren't any good. It means that the market thought it was risky to, tell that kind of a story this year, type of a thing, or you get picked up and you're in development, and then there's a regime change at the top, and they wipe the slate clean.
We're not doing
that
it anymore.
All the time. So it's tough. It's tough. You have to have resilience, perseverance, passion. You have to have all these things in spades just to get through.
Right. And so it seems so normal that you'd be like, and so we'd like to humanize a little bit of this, which feels like a lot of the messaging we actually heard from Ayati when it was coming out. Is like, we need to be able to have a lifestyle that actually allows us to do this art form in some way or another. When you're thinking about the writer's strike, how has this affected you personally? Like, how's it feel over there to be Michael right now? Is it stressful? Is it on your mind nonstop? Is it like, oh, we'll get through this? Like, what's your reaction to this?
I think the adjective is anxiety. I think it's not like jaw clenching stress. It's anxious because we all have a sense that this could actually go on for quite a long time, because the two sides are fairly far apart, at least at the moment. And actually negotiations aren't going on right now, at least on the WGA side, because the DGA is negotiating in advance of the expiration of the contract. So that's where the AMTP is focused right now.
Actually, that's Michael, if I can interrupt you, that's a question that I wanted to ask you. Like, we hear about the debt ceiling right now in the conversation, like every single day they had this meeting and this is how much they gave on this side in terms of like this strike, we're like, it's kind of like silence where everyone's picketing and we're striking right now. And what you just said to me is they're not meeting every day, like getting a little closer to anything. It's just nothing's happening.
They're not even talking as far as I'm aware.
Right.
Which is the studios are talking to the directors. It's done behind closed doors, even as a guild member, a directors guild member. We're not told, day by day. They do update us from time to time, but they haven't since they went into the room, and that's that's understandable why they need to keep that private. But they'll either come to terms or won't.
Right.
And if they do, that could put pressure on the writers to try to compromise, but not necessarily, because we've come this far, and maybe we won't want to, or maybe they don't, and it puts more pressure on the studios to change.
Right. I see
Yeah.
that connected to. I can see how that can feel. There's a. I can see the additional anxiety around like, well, what's happening? What's going on? Like, are we getting any closer? Like, are we any closer to a finish line here? What's the deal here? And as I'm thinking about this, you must have relationships with tons of people who are on the studio side of this thing. And are those relationships strained? You just never talk to them anymore right now? Like, what does that look like? Do you have relationships where you're like, it's really awkward conversations, or do you just like, oh, this sucks and we're not in charge anyway? Like, how does that filter down?
Well, there's been a bit. I mean, at least it becomes a little bit more complicated for me since I'm, high, belong to two different guilds. But the principle behind the strike is to withhold to stop the pipeline, to withhold material, withhold our labor, so that they are forced to come to the table and forced to come to a compromise. So. Uh, we're asked not to be talking to the studios and not to be promoting. I don't have a film coming out now, but other writers they're being asked not to attend the premieres of their films and things like that. So yeah, it's awkward, but it's not like my friends who are the executives are the people who can make this,
Right.
can really turn, make come to terms in terms of negotiations. It's the Bob Igers and the
Sure.
and his friends that can really make a
Right.
change.
When you said that, I could just, and when you said like, they're asked being not to go to the premieres of their film, I could just feel that being super heartbreaking for people who put all
Yeah.
this effort in and like to, no, don't go. I mean, you shouldn't, because we're fighting for something else, but what a hurt that must have for those
It's very,
filmmakers.
it's very
Yeah.
disappointing because that the director and the writer of that or the writer of that film in this case, because the directors are on strike at this point. But if someone's a writer director, they're still being asked not to attend, um, and not to do promotion. So you're sort of losing out on that sort of PR run for yourself and your own career. Your movie could get buried. Your movie, if it's a theatrical release, could get you know terrible box office returns, which doesn't look great on your track record. And, sure, right now we all know there's a strike going on, but in 5 years, are people going to remember that? I
Right.
don't know. Maybe it's not his or her fault, but that will be that will sort of be on the record and out of their control. So, and the other thing is that person may very well have been working on this for 5 or 6 years,
Right. Right. Yeah. Painful. Yeah.
not 5 or 6 months.
Yeah. When everyone, as we're talking about like ways to get involved, a lot of people are picketing. I think that's a great way to get out there. How do you see that impacting like this, how it works? I mean, I think it gives a really good face to it. We see a lot of social media, we see a lot of films or TV, we see people showing that all the time. What is your thought on, people, joining the picket line?
Well, I mean, it's been a thing for a very long time because it works. It's visibility. I mean, it's something that it ends up on social media. It ends up on the news. People are driving by. I mean, one of the best things that happens when you're out there in the hot sun, walking back and forth at sort of a monotonous pace and not quite getting dizzy, but practically, people are coming by and honking in
Yeah.
support. And that they're not just doing it because it's a spectacle. They're doing it because they actually do know what we're striking for and what we're fighting for, and it is fair. And people are supporting that. People outside the industry. I don't think every single person driving by is inside the
Right.
industry,
Right. As you say that, I'm thinking
and
about.
and almost every single person's honking in
Right.
support. It's great.
Yeah. As I'm thinking about this, and we touched a little bit on the like anxiety that might be coming up, that's coming up for you, and I'm sure for other writers. Are there people in your life who like your family all understands, or you have to explain this to them, or like how's it going? I'm just imagining so many artists are
Um,
out. They're one person in their family who decide to go to LA and do this thing, right? You're laughing, so
LA.
yeah. What's
No, I'm laughing because I actually sent them a podcast. I sent them the Strike Talk from Deadline, and I
great?
said, you should listen to this, and they did, and I got some really sweet messages back from my family about hanging in there, and just sticking to my guns and keep doing what I'm doing, and it was great. But that podcast by Todd Garner, who's a producer, and Billy Ray, who's a writer, really does break it down, a lot of the things that we've been talking about today, and helps people under both inside and outside the industry. And I say inside and outside the industry because you'd be surprised. this whole really came about because the WGA put out a survey to the guild members, and 6 or 7,000 of us wrote back. And I think that the leadership of the guild was aghast at how difficult things were for us. And we are all programmed, even everyone in production is really programmed to like just get it done.
Head down,
no
get it done.
What.
We're all chipping in, like community. Yeah, totally.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're the set designer and the circus set works on Friday and you're like, I'm not going to have it done till Tuesday. Well, it doesn't work that way. You just work until it shoots Friday morning. It has to be ready Friday morning. Right. There's no like, oh, just push it a little bit. Like, it's something, the storm happens and gets knocked down. They redo the schedule, but not because somebody's behind.
Right.
And so this idea of like, just get it done, just deliver and do it at the highest quality, no matter what sort of the sacrifice is sort of embedded in all of us in Hollywood. I just totally lost my, so the 6 or 7,000 person survey that came back, they realized how miserable we were and how people were just not making a living any longer. And then how widespread these problems are. There's a feature directors dinner every year at the Directors Guild. And, sometimes depending on what it is or isn't going on in my career, I do or don't want to go because I don't, let's say a movie just fell apart for me. I don't want to go sit there with a bunch of directors and, hear about how amazing everything is for them and how crappy everything is for me on this particular Wednesday. And, my husband always says, no, you're going. So I go, and it's always it's the best day of the year because a lot of what I hear, it's like, we're all in the same boat and we start trading stories and someone says this happened. And I was like, oh, that happened to me. And then I go, that happened to me too. And especially directors are quite isolated. We don't work when we're making a movie, we have a whole team of people to help us, but in between we're pretty isolated. We don't like hang out, sort of. There's not like the writer's room where you have a bunch of other writers. And so you can get kind of siloed. And so I think the same thing kind of happened with this survey from the WGA, the guild members, is that all of a sudden the leadership realized, oh my gosh, this is happening throughout. It's pervasive. It's at all levels. Everyone's being squeezed. And I think that that's why, we're taking the action that we are. And it's also why it is resonating in other unions and guilds within the industry and why it's resonating with people outside the industry, because it is sort of this insider baseball thing that's going on. But for all the reasons that we've been talking about, it actually is transcending the business to the outside, and it is able to be understood. I think, by those that are paying attention.
Yeah. And I think, Michael, one of the things you just said just really struck me because in the tagline to this podcast, it says to slay the suffering artist myth. And I think that there's like a weird tie into this conversation. Well, you've decided to be a writer, so shouldn't you just be suffering anyway? That's like part of what you signed up for when you decided to be a writer, which is separate from, we have a job and we have a job to do and we are delivering for you and it is unfair. And so there's like, it's trading off of that story. Sometimes I think when we are discussing the strike or when we're talking about the intricacies of the strike, you can hear that kind of in people's way that they're showing up into the conversation. And I think it's important that we make this kind of distinction here. Right. Does that resonate with you?
I mean, that concept, totally. That the first time I came across that concept or some form of it was in, Big Magic, that?
Of course, yes. Elizabeth Gilbert,
the woman who wrote Eat, Pray. Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, and this idea that to make great art you have to be miserable or suffering, is BS. And I agree with that you don't need to be suffering. In fact, I think it's the opposite. I think the more blissful you are, the more in tune with yourself you are. You can make absolutely great art. I mean, I suppose some people do great suffering and make great stuff, but they're not required. They're not connected in that way. However, we are making, passionate, great work, and we are suffering, and we don't need to suffer. We don't need to be, the crews don't need to be working 18-hour days and and driving home in dangerous conditions and back within 8 hours or 6 hours the next morning. It's insane.
Yeah.
And we don't need to be doing something in the shortest possible time. I have two projects there's one project, a film project that I wrote on spec, did it all myself. I mean, meaning like I turned down other work because I was very passionate about writing this. And I thought it would take me as long to convince someone else to pay me to do it as it would to just do it myself. So I did it myself. And I put it down for a year and did other stuff. And I picked it up and did a rewrite. I put it down for another year and picked it up and did a rewrite and kind of finally got it on the third try, which goes back to that idea of like one-step deals. I mean, I'm not saying that it should take somebody 3 or 4 years to write a script, but in principle, getting space from it, getting time away, as you know, you come back to something fresh. And this idea of like everything being squeezed down to the minimum number of days and hours that you can possibly get anything done, it's not good for the product.
Yeah, that's what I heard you say. What I hear you is like, we're not going to have great art. This is not going to be the great golden age of television that we've been experiencing if we keep squeezing and squeezing and squeezing. Get it done in 2 days, get it done in 3 days, like figure it out. It's not.
No, and this is coming from the country that has 0 weeks of paid vacation. I mean, it's the same thing. You've got to relax. You have to relax your mind, your body, your soul to come back to the life that you're living, to be more productive. You can be more productive when you're not burned out. And the idea that you just burn everyone out, discard them, and fill the gap with the next crop of people is extremely short-sighted.
Yeah, 100%. Yes. So I'm sure there's a lot of people listening right now who are writers or they're directors and they're just thinking about the future of this, or they're aspiring writers and directors. What would you want them to hear both in this moment and just from you, Michael, the person who's had success in this way?
Well, I do get, approached by a lot of, people from the schools that I went to and through the, alumni connection, and try to help them find their way. I'm talking about historically over the decades, and as well as, sons and daughters and nieces and nephews of friends and things like that. And I try to get them in touch with their voice and why they want to do this. Because if you don't really, really, really want to be an artist, be a creative person, the insecurity on an economic level of approaching this lifestyle in this sort of capitalistic society is really difficult.
Yeah.
And so you've really, really got to want it. And you've really got to want it from the core. And you've really got to be willing to do no matter what it takes, whether that's taking a really crappy side job or running a side hustle or marrying a really rich person that you don't love, whatever it is. I
think you're writing a movie right now, Michael. I think you started writing a movie just now.
I'm just saying it doesn't always have to be noble.
Yeah.
But you've really got to want it, because this business, it sheds the people who can't hack it. Mm-hmm. And so the attrition, the people that stay in the basket are the tough ones, and can stick it out. So, I guess the first piece of advice would be along the lines of like, do you want it for the fame and the glory? Do you want it because it's, easy and whatever, glamour?
Yeah.
Those are the wrong reasons, because it's not. Yeah. I mean, there are elements of it, but it's not like that every day. You just see that every day.
Right.
And you just see the people that succeed. You don't see the people that fail.
Yeah.
And there are a lot.
Yeah.
And you've got to be able to, and you talked about this on one of your other podcasts with an actress, about being able to handle rejection and not let that seep into your sense of self-worth.
Yeah.
And part of that you develop as you go and as you get rejected and as you gain success. But it's also just as weird to have success and then, I wouldn't say failure, but rejection after that. You're like, wait a minute, what? well, that was great. Yeah, but the rules changed again. You're like, oh,
Well,
geez.
I mean, even when you talked
You
about
know,
going to the
so
director dinner, you're like, yeah, but if it wasn't a great past couple of months, I'm not going to feel like full of myself a little bit. I want to feel full of myself when I go there. Obviously, you have a great husband who says go, so kudos to him, and it always turns out great. But we all feel
yeah,
that like I call this the lie of recency, or like how recently something good happened means your value, like it equals your value because you recently did something good. And there's
yeah,
so much more in your history,
total.
right?
It's yeah, it's all insecurity and silly ego driven stuff. But but my point in that story, which is that you get there and you realize is that there's community and that you're not alone and you're
Yeah.
not the only person going through it. But we're all experiencing these things, at different levels and at different times. But we we all go through it.
And what you just said, Michael, I think kind of landed the plane around the conversation of like when you're saying like, why do you want to do this? Is it fame and fortune or whatever? If you can say yes to, I would like to be in a community where we know it's a bit of a roller coaster of up and down. Of sometimes you have success and sometimes that doesn't happen. If you can say yes to what that path looks like, then you're going to be okay here. And if you don't feel like that's going to be okay for you, or the up and down piece of it, I'm also wondering like how do we?
And
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. No, it's in, and the financial side of it, because a lot of like when I say it's like my friends who's looking out for their kid's 18 and wants to like get into Hollywood, and the father's like, oh, shit, thinking like, what am I going to do? How do I support? How do I subsidize this kid, or do I cut him off, or what's that the
Yeah,
kind those are the kind of questions that the parents are asking me, like how do I not squash his or her dreams,
yeah,
but how do I, you know, I've just paid for $500,000 worth of college. I'm tapped out. You know what I mean? Like, what
yeah,
do I do? And so, I mean, there isn't a right answer to that, except that going through it myself, I always had to keep my eyes on the distant horizon, and not like on the road right in front of me, because that makes the car go, wiggle, wiggle, wiggle across the road. I had to look at, there's going to be big paydays and then big spans of time where nothing's coming in, and one has to get you, through the other. And, or like I said, maybe you have a side hustle or something. But if you're the moment you get a check, you're out there, getting the bachelor pad and the expensive car and you're gonna, I don't know, you're gonna get in trouble.
yeah,
So you just have to, like I said, just sort of keep. At least what I did is I worked freelance my whole career after, with the exception of like 3 years after I graduated from college, and so I I wouldn't say got used to, but I understood how to ride out that financial roller coaster. But it's still hard. It's not easy.
sure.
It's very, I mean, you asked before about how it feels right now. And that's part of the anxiety, is because I have a whole bunch of projects that are ready to go, and I can't put them into production right now.
Yeah, yeah,
And, and even, and even if I were to like want to cross the picket line and do things and break with my guild or whatever, you can't get, I mean, not that I would, but you can't get you can't get bond companies to insure your project. SAG's about to go on strike.
right.
It's a goal. This is the time we've got to fix this now, because it's affecting all of us. And like I said before, if we don't, we're going to decimate the talent in the industry.
Yeah. That is the big call that I think everyone needs to hear right now. That we will decimate the talent in the industry. When we're talking about this, the question that comes to me is all the energy that you normally put into those projects or that you're writing right now. And like, I don't know if the strike means you're not allowed to put a pencil to paper. You're not allowed to write right now. Like, I don't know if that's exactly how the strike works, but like, what do you do with that energy? Like, are you like secretly writing like that no one ever gets to see until someday? Or like, where do you put that creative force that's already was in
The
you
the
from,
the
for so long?
it's it's pencils down. That's the headline. If you're writing something on your own for spec, they don't. That's something that you have the right to do, but you can't be writing. You can't, as a guild member, you can't write something non-guild, and
Right.
you also can't write something for a producer studio that is signatory, to the guild's regulation.
Right.
So the only thing you could write would be a book, because that would fall outside of this, or a play or something on spec. But also, I mean, this isn't a great thing, but like similar to how the pandemic was sort of not right in the beginning, but maybe like in that first like third or whatever, or half, was sometimes recalibrating and taking a minute and be like, okay, like maybe I need a minute to not work so hard, because I've been working very, very hard to get all of these projects up. Maybe I just need a minute to circle the wagons, recenter, so I can come back, so that when I am able to come back, I'm recharged and not exhausted. I mean, that's not the point of the strike.
Right.
But if there's going to be a strike, if there's going to be a pandemic, if there's going to be something, you might as well figure out how to, I don't want to say take advantage of it, but use, get something good out of it.
Sure.
I mean, if I sat here every day with the shades drawn, laying on the couch, crying, I'm not sure that would do me any good. So
I don't think it would.
Yeah, we go out there and we fight for what we're asking for, and with an eye to what we're going to do when we get back.
Got it. Right. So, Michael, we're wrapping up here. I just want
not crossing the picket line. Not doing things surreptitiously. It undermines all the people who are. It undermines all of us, right, if that happens.
Right. And it sounds like, there are other places to put your energy. And I think what I'm also hearing you say is, when the pandemic happens, we slow down, we take it for that piece of it. This isn't a pandemic, I realize that, but we can take it down for the slowdown piece and we're standing up for something at the same time. The energy kind of shifts there. So if I can have 5 more minutes, I need to tell you that I am a Grey Gardens mega fan. My best friend was the original music director for the Broadway show before it even went to Broadway. And our little tiny apartment at 508 West 29th in New York City, it was on every single day. I can recite the entire thing from beginning to end. And of course I've watched the HBO show, your film. And so I've got one question for you. Don't worry, it's not going to be it's not a tricky question, but knowing that this documentary is kind of like a perfect documentary, like it doesn't need to be touched or remade. Like, what was your inspiration? That yours was, I want to tell the story differently. And the B part of this question is, did knowing that it exists limit you in some way? Did it really give you a foil to create what you created? It says, if y'all haven't watched the film, you need to run over to HBO, even though we're mad at HBO right now, and watch it because it is so excellent.
Thank you very much. I'm glad. I didn't know that you're such a big fan. It did not limit me. So what basically happened was that I had gone to, this is kind of going back a little bit, but I had gone to film school. I was out making commercials. I was, trying to figure out how I was going to, make movies. And I was a little hemmed in by the formula of the screenplay. This has to happen by page 30, and this has to happen, and that has to happen. And I got a little obsessed with like following the rules, and it kind of short circuited me. And I was like, ugh. And a friend of mine wrote a novel. And if you're writing a novel, you want to go off on 10 pages on the color of the curtains. It's your book. You can do whatever you want. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to write a novel and then I'll make that into a screenplay once I've sort of expressed myself or figured out what I want to say. And then I'll squeeze it into the Hollywood formula. And
because writing a novel is so easy. Because writing a novel is just, but at least it was free.
I do think it can be a little bit more free form. Yeah. I think there are more variations of the structure of a novel. And so I started writing a novel, and it was about a twin brother and sister who had a very eccentric mother, and they lived in some sort of vacation hamlet. I'm from the Hamptons, and so that was certainly the backdrop, but it was like Fisher's Island or Block Island or Hamptons or something like that. And I was 4 or 5 chapters into writing it when I finally saw Grey Gardens, which I had heard of for years and years and years, but I had never seen. I'd even biked past the house in Grey Gardens, in East Hampton. And it came out on DVD, and I saw it, and the truth is, it's so kind of hypnotic and mesmerizing that I actually fell asleep at one point. And I woke up at the end with this like epiphany, and I said, this is the themes I'm already writing about, but this is a way better vehicle for a film. And these will be roles that prominent actresses would die
to play. Yes.
It's just Yeah, but it all came to me it was like
Yeah.
that. It was literally like an epiphany. I mean, it was like this like lightning bolt. And I immediately restarted the documentary and I got out a legal pad and I just started writing down questions that it's the way it's edited there's a lot of overlapping dialogue. It's hard to decipher
Right.
what they're saying. We didn't have closed captions and stuff like that back then, like we do now. So, I, yeah, so I started all these questions and then I just started, from my, educational background, I just knew how to like dig deep. And the internet, like I exhausted the internet in like 2 days on Grey Gardens. There was nothing. The internet was very much smaller back then. And so I went to microfilm and microfiche and magazines and all this newspapers and all this stuff. And I found Edie's death certificate. And through that, I found the lawyer. And then through that, I tracked down the family. Now you can do all this stuff on the internet, but back then you had to be kind of a
Right.
sleuth. So anyway,
So Michael,
that's how the
did it
whole
have a
thing.
second level of excitement for you because you got to be sleuthing? Because that must have been a totally different part of your brain than the writer part of you. Was it like, this is cool, I'm learning things, and I'm like, were you in love with these women at that point? Like, what was the deal for you?
Well, I, I was very close to my grandmother, and there was something about my grandmother that sort of overlapped between the two of them. I mean, she didn't live in poverty, and she didn't,
Sure.
she lived alone because my grandfather passed before my parents got together. But 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 my grandmother was kind of a born showman, the way that that both of them were, but the way, especially how Big Edie was, about how she would sort of perform and whatnot, and then just going up to her, with her in summers in the Hamptons, and that point when Edie goes into the surf, and you see her, in the bathing cap, like it was just all kind of these um, parts of my childhood, my relationship with my grandmother that really came to the front. And yeah, I fell in love with them in that way, like immediately sort of in the relationship. And there was like a lot to figure out. The thing that I think I was drawn to is that they were themselves despite adversity. That was
Hmm.
the thing that I think the thematic pull, for me. And, and that became, I didn't ever see it. I didn't see them as campy. I didn't see them as, I mean, it's not like I can't see it now,
Right.
but I didn't see them as inherently campy. I wasn't laughing at them. I felt for them. I felt this idea of a dream deferred, this idea of you had dreams and you lost your chance. That crushes me. An
Right.
artist who isn't fully realized is still an artist, but what what maybe what could have been different,
Right.
and what do you do? Do you banish that and let that die, or do you still let it be part of your spirit? And these were all the things that attracted me. I mean, of course the costumes and all that were fun, but it was more those core things. I can't even remember your original question, but that was,
Right.
but no, that the documentary, so I didn't think that the documentary, I was conscious. The first draft of the screenplay, or many drafts of the screenplay, actually the one that I originally set up at HBO, was linear because I didn't have the money at the time to get the rights to the documentary. So I didn't want to write something that I then was like
Hmm.
that would fall
Right.
apart. So in that original version, the documentary is like 2 pages because it covered 40 years, and the documentary was shot over 6 weeks. So it didn't cross cut like that. But later when we went to HBO, then they secured the rights from the Maisels. I had already been in contact with them and talked to them, but I wasn't like legally
Sure.
beholden to them in that way. And that's how I structured it. But I did want to, my intention was always that the documentary was perfect. And if I was going to create something, I wanted it to enhance the documentary and not replace it, and not just simply recreate it. And so that was, and when you know that it was originally linear, then you really know, that
Yeah.
that was the case.
Yeah, and all of those things that you tried to accomplish on my end felt very true for someone who felt very beholden to it and obsessed with the documentary. I know I'm not some big film critic, but I will say that as a mega
Thank
fan,
you.
I want to share that with you. And so it's a thrill to
Thank you.
talk to you on that level. And so if I'm to kind of end our conversation today, I know I took in a different direction with Grey Garden, so I'm delighted I got to hear kind of that piece of it.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
what's your big hope for what's next on the other side of this, on the other side of the strike?
I really hope that they're on the other side of the strike. I hope that the strike does end, because I hope that there's a rebalancing. Like I said before, everyone in this industry works really, really hard. And we do it because it comes from this like core place of passion and storytelling and artistry. And I mean that all the way through the different trades. The work that everyone does is extraordinary. It's not just the directors and the writers. It's literally everyone. And coming from production and then becoming a director, I know that because I was at the bottom and I saw what everybody was doing and what care, they take with their work. And we all do that. And profit is important, but it's not the only thing. And some profit is great. Like tons and tons of profit. You've got to rebalance things, because we're the people doing the grinding work and doing this, I'm not saying that they're not important too and that they're not contributing. They are, but they can't keep grinding us down, because we're just going to leave. And whether it's literally us leaving or just not new people coming in, they're going to destroy an absolutely incredible business. And we'll tell stories, we'll just tell them in a different way,
right,
in a different medium. And we don't want that. We like this medium.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, for sure. That's a great way, I think, to end this conversation today. Michael, thank you so much for educating
Thanks,
us,
Brian.
and also sharing really your own personal experience throughout this. I think that is really what I think a lot of people are going to hear in this episode, is your personal experience with this. So thank you so much for joining us. If anybody wants to watch what's going on with Michael, is there a place they can do that?
Yeah, I mean, on Twitter, I pretty much just share my political angst and frustrations, and then on Instagram, I just sort of like share a little bit of my life and what's going on. My mom says we sure know how to have a good time, and I tell her, well, I only post I don't post when I go to the grocery store. Yeah, so they're just both at Michael Sucsy on those two platforms, and I really do. I do like sharing, and I like hearing from people who's when work I've created affects other people in a positive way. It's actually the thing that sustains me and keeps me going. It really does mean a lot, and people do reach out and do that out of the blue, and it's very kind.
Oh, great. Thank you, Michael. We will link to both of those in the show notes here. So if you got something nice to say to
Thanks.
Michael, please send it to his way. Thank you so much. He's going to need that support out on the picket line. So thank you so much, Michael. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Brian. Thank you, everyone.